we are very excited to welcome you to Coffee and Convos. And this has just been a great space for us to have conversations with people about whatever is happening in our world and in our space and within Australia and outside of Australia. We've had a chance to be with members of our congregation as well as other salvos in our community. And tonight I am just so pleased to be able to welcome a man that has been a part of my life, well, for all my life. And that is General Brian Peddle, who just happens to be my dad as well. So this was an easy connection. I don't think many people would have gotten this very quickly, but I did, which is great. So Dad and General Peddle, yes. We are happy to welcome you to Carindale Salvo's Coffee and Convo. Now, do you have your coffee, sir?
I do. I have a proper mug as well, as you can see.
Oh, so look at this. Yeah, see, while we're not together, we are together.
Yes. Can I make something clear for your listeners?
Yes, go.
For the record, Captain Krista has always gotten what she wants. So getting people on Wednesday night is quite legitimate.
Look, there's not very many times that I pull this card. Let's just be clear. Not many times I pull this card. But look, there's a few reasons why we thought that this would be a really, really good conversation. And I think part of the luxury that I have, and I do consider it a luxury, is that when I call you, we get a chance to talk about life and family and silly with the grandkids and all that kind of stuff. But we also get a chance to step into your world and get a perspective that we wouldn't normally have. And that's been a gift, and that's been really, really good. And so Tim and I were thinking that it would be really good for us just to share, especially during this interesting time that we're in, this season that we're in. Now, we probably should acknowledge, Dad, because there are people that watch this that may not be part of the Salvation Army, what it means to be general of the Salvation Army. So if you're not part of our space, the general is basically the person that leads the Salvation Army in the world. So you would have a world view and you would lead the whole Salvation Army in the world. Am I describing that well, General?
I'm waiting to see what it is that I actually do. So that's you're doing good so far.
That's good. That's good. And that's a bit strange sometimes to think about. Like for me. And even for Stephanie, for my sister, you know, when we think about that a little bit, that's a bit interesting and a bit strange.
That's strange for me as well.
Yeah. But it is, yes. I bet it is. So look. This is something that you and I have talked about quite a bit. And it's the concept of that we live in two completely different countries.
Yes.
And so you're in the UK, just to acknowledge that you live in London, England. And we live in Carindale, Brisbane, Australia. And our two countries have just had completely different realities swirling around when we talk about COVID and response and also the situations that we've found ourselves in. So I was listening to the radio the other day here, and they used the term lockdown. So you would be aware, as we've talked about, that a lot of our restrictions are slowly being lifted. And they've been saying here the word lockdown, that our lockdown is being restricted. And when I think about that compared to where you are, that term is so different in your space. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about, we've been hearing in the news, tell us a little bit about the UK and Europe. And
well, here in London, we've been inundated with a few words. It's stay at home, save lives.
Yeah.
And that really interprets into a context where, 11, 12 million people have had to stay in their houses, in their flats. And that's been our experience. And it's interesting that today it is 60 days that we've been in our flat, with two exceptions. We can go for grocery and we can go for one exercise per day. Now, restrictions are beginning to lift, but only just a little. And it's been interesting. I have to admit, I was skeptical. How could you keep a city this large in a lockdown reality? I have to say, I'm quite proud of how people have responded to that and done their best. Because each day you see, we get the death report, and even Friday of last week, it was 400 plus people who had died on that day. So it's a very poignant reminder day by day. So we've been locked down or locked in or locked up.
Yeah, yeah. Which is a different freedom than what we've been experiencing here, and we've been very blessed here.
Yeah.
And I mean, we're an island nation, so that in itself has created that space.
Yeah.
So look, what does the General do in lockdown? I mean, you're used to traveling the world. You're used to being gone for 3 weeks sometimes at a time, maybe even more than that. Your schedule has changed significantly. And I know you well enough to know that being home is something very different to what you would be used to. So what does the General do in lockdown? Tell us.
Well, I might admit, I hope this translates okay in Australian language, but I understand the meaning of cabin fever.
Oh, yes.
I mean, I am very restricted. My staff tells me that I travel outside of London 7 months of the year. What's been mostly difficult for me is the reality that I've had to wipe clean my schedule literally from March, and now it's pretty blank. I think we still have a couple of events in November that we're hoping will still happen. But I think the sadness for me is that some of these things were very, very important events. And now we're trying to recalibrate to see how we can salvage in 2021 or sometime in the future. Everything from meetings with international leaders to, 100 years celebration in Nigeria. And these things fall away. So the General has been a little bit more digital, very much in front of the screen, using the technology to reach out around the world. I've been able to have more contact with people that I'm relying upon, my territorial leaders, for instance. I never get an opportunity to pick up the telephone and simply call and say, how are things in Malawi or in New Delhi? But I've been able to do that. So there are silver linings in the cloud, but it's not what I do. It's not who I am. And I'm waiting for the day anxiously when I can travel again and embrace the army, which is what we do.
Yeah. I think that's the perspective that's so important, because I know here we can just look in our own space and just see the needs of our own space, but your view is worldwide, which would be different than what our view would be. Yeah. What does a typical day look like for the General and for Commissioner Rosalie?
Well, we're, like many people, trying to keep certain routines. So I don't think the beginning to our day has changed. I love being early. I love my coffee in the morning.
Right. You're missing your latte. Missing your lattes, right?
I am. I had a latte with the Chief of the Staff this week in person on a bench.
Yes.
Social distancing in place. That's the first latte I've had in almost 2 months. It was really good. So
that's already something different between our two countries, because our coffee shops have been open the whole way.
Well, you guys know the meaning of necessities.
Right? Yes, yes.
But yeah, so that's our day. I think, particularly in the morning, we're very up and at it and doing a lot of social contact. Beautifully so, international headquarters has been able to go, online, digital, almost 100%. So nothing has changed in our meeting schedules, our boards, our decision-making processes that really exist to support the International Army anyway, but is now being called on to support the International Salvation Army in a very specific way.
Yeah.
So everything about the routine of IHQ is full on. We have it's strange to me, but we have the worldwide prayer meeting on Thursdays. Normally we would get 15 people at IHQ at 7:30. Consistently, we've had over 60 people online praying for the International Salvation Army since this whole lockdown began. So there are good things and there are bad things and there are challenging things, but I want some of my old normal back as soon as possible.
Yeah. Yeah, you've been active too.
Yeah.
Yeah, lots of walking, bike riding.
Yeah. I think we have been averaging, should I say this online, but we've been averaging between 75 and 80 kilometers a week.
Walking?
Walking, besides the cycling, but walking.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
Good for you. That's really good. Yeah, really, really good. So you touched on something there that already you've learned in the new online space, of the fact that for some things you can get more participation because people are available by just jumping on their computer. So look, we've been doing a lot of learning here as well. Tim and I have shared with you that this has been one of the steepest learning curves that we've been on, learning lots of things through this COVID. What are the lessons that you have learned during this season of isolation? And you can think about that broadly and maybe even think about that personally.
Yeah, I think it's hard to put in a few words what you've learned. I've had to think through again the significance of the value of time. I've had more time.
Yeah.
So the question is, what do I do with that time? I am not preparing as many sermons, and I'm not packing my suitcase, and I'm not fetching my uniform from the cleaners, and I'm not. So what do I do with that time? So the pause button has challenged me to use time more wisely, and in that process, I think I've been able to read more. I certainly have been able to do more looking into the world through social media and checking up on the Salvation Army. And I've been able to engage people in a different way. And that is about coming into people's personal space on the computer. We use Teams at IHQ. And after a few days of not being in touch, I get in touch with all the international secretaries and make sure Africa's okay, making sure we're okay across Europe and Southeast Asia. I even check on Australia every now and then just to see how things are going. And I think personally, it's been the accountability for that time. Walking more, yes, but listening to podcasts while I walk. Just making sure that I'm not wasting this opportunity, and there are people around me who are helping with that accountability.
Yeah, that's good. And I think that's a question that we're posing to a lot of people here as well. Like, what are we learning through this experience? What is God specifically teaching me? And what is God teaching you during this time? And connecting with the common themes, Dad? Like that is really important, is connecting with those common themes. What is that? What is that? You know, that's how the Lord, I think, really speaks to us as well, is when we're united in things that we're hearing together.
Yeah. Understand. I think everybody is going to take away, like we keep hearing about this new normal versus our old normal. And I think that has to be a careful evaluation for everyone. I said on Twitter this week, having met with the chief of the staff, I want my old normal back because I'd rather be sitting with him than doing a computer call because we enjoy one another's company.
Yeah.
I want my old normal back. But on the other side, the moments that I've had given to me to do other things of making that personal call or checking in on somebody or even talking to the grandchildren a little bit more. I wish there was room for all of that in whatever normal comes afterwards, but you watch and see. We will go back and we will forget many of the things we've learned. So we need to be very careful not to lose this opportunity.
Yeah. And I think we've been using the word pushing against what would put us back in the ways that we've learned. You know, we really need to push against what would put us back in that space.
Yeah. We have to have a pretty big debrief among us to say what was good about this that we keep.
Yeah. You mentioned just even, okay, can I go off script for a minute? Not off script, but do you trust me?
Cheers.
You said I'd do that. No, this is an interesting question because I read this in an article this week about the fact that I think this was focused on New York, that some of the larger companies have discovered the fact that their efficiency has doubled since their employees have been working from home and are actually looking at the concept of getting rid of their office space and that overhead and functioning a completely different way. Now we're talking about that locally. Even the Greater Salvation Army in Australia is calling people to prayer. We're having a wave of prayer about seeking what is the Lord teaching us during this time? What are the things that we have to hold on to during this time, right? And do you see, do you see anything changing for the Salvation Army that would be significant, even, I don't know, with an IHQ, or is that just going to be a careful journey?
Will be a careful journey. Perhaps you wouldn't know that we already have a work from home policy.
Yeah.
So we have a number of people that are not on the IHQ building. We have officers that work for us that still live in their home territories, like Australia.
Yes.
So
right.
we're not unaccustomed to that. The other piece that we will have to walk carefully with is that as we have now dialogue about returning to work, they're only going to permit that if we can socially distance. So that means bringing people back in an integrated way and to experiment even more with, well, are there people that are more productive when they work at home?
Yeah.
I've often thought I could be at the office in the morning and get the important shared stuff done. But in the afternoon, I'm probably better off from an Army perspective of doing my studying and preparing for my travels and so on at home. So I think it's going to be a measure of where was that productivity? How do we continue to benefit from the best? Like when our team is working on all of the projects around the world and you're working from home, they're not distracted by anything except for getting that project approved and get it operational right on the other side of the world. And I don't doubt there's a productivity measure in that that's worth redeeming and keeping. So I think in the Greater Salvation Army, the biggest question will be, what do we do with all of the online expressions? What do we keep of that? Because I'm a firm believer in the value of the gathered church.
Yeah.
But I don't think that needs to eclipse what we've learned about what we're doing here right now.
Yeah.
How often do you get the General to visit Brisbane?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And I think that's the one thing that we've learned is that the value of community is incredibly important. So being together, like our humanity needs that. That's the way God created us. And if there were any questions about that, there isn't any now, that is a need that we all have. But, you know, maybe there's a both and an integration of what we've learned that can be brought into our space.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so you have your eye on the world. We've kind of said that that's the case. You have a different perspective than the majority of us. What are your biggest concerns for our world and the Salvation Army ministry right now in these moments that we might be able to pray for, or that we may not be aware of, maybe even?
Yeah. Oh, that is mostly where my focus would be in these days. I might be able to accept that things are good in South Pacific where you are. Things are managing okay in North America or in parts of Europe. But when I look beyond that, I know there are very real concerns. Like I admit that sitting here in my flat with all my digital capacity, lots of food, good company, just the two of us, that is not the reality of people living in New Delhi or in Nairobi or Kakamega or parts of the world where there are real concerns. So when I think about the Salvation Army, for instance, I don't know if our Salvationists would understand that in some parts of rural Salvation Army, choose a continent. You might or might not have a bank account, which means you might or might not receive an allowance that comes and goes into your bank account and you just withdraw it as you need it. Your allowance is dependent upon the church coming together on Sunday and taking an offering or bringing food, chicken, rice with them to give to you. And with all of that falling away, I'm very concerned about how well our folks are doing. Food security in a world where literally you only have today's food because you don't have a refrigerator and you don't go down to Woolworths and stock up. That's a very Western mentality. And when the street vendors are not on the streets selling the food that you get daily, because they're not allowed, how do you feed your family? And that applies to our officers and our soldiers. And yet, while that is happening, the Salvation Army has a serving heart, and people who are in very desperate need are out filling the needs of others. It's amazing. The other things that scare me or concern me, they scare me as well. We have 90 hospitals.
Yeah.
And in lands that are perhaps struggling with resources to begin with, you add to that COVID-19 and the idea of a respirator or PPE. Let's be serious. We know these things are not readily available. And I'm delighted that, you know, the Salvation Army says to a hospital in Zimbabwe, get yourself into Harare. We have some project money for you. Find 5 respirators to add to the 1 or 2 that you already have, because COVID is coming. So I'm glad that we can look at the Army and look through a lens that we belong together, we support one another, and we are stronger together. When people ask, General, how can we pray for you? Well, I usually say, well, help me lift up the International Salvation Army in prayer, because that's my primary concern as I begin praying here myself every day.
Yeah. There was, again, something I was reading the other day, and you and I have chatted about it, but of the fact that there are more people that are going to die from starvation, mental health issues. You know, the list is like the effects of all of this. The list will be incredibly long. Then will die from COVID itself.
Yeah.
And that is what we hold in tension. I think that's what the politicians hold in tension, and that's what we all hold in tension, is that, you know, there is a need for us to isolate, or we don't want to say isolate or social distancing, physical distancing. There's a need for that. But there are many in our world who are going to die from starvation because of what has to happen. And we don't hold that, we don't really understand that as well.
I hope the international community will respond well to COVID-19. I don't think we're all the way there yet, but I think if we could do that as an international community, maybe by learning through that process, the issue of hunger would also be attacked. The fact that every few seconds a child dies of poor birthing context or from malnutrition, in just a few seconds that we're talking, more children have died, and it's not from COVID. So maybe we could learn lessons or ways and means in which we wouldn't be numb to the needs of the world that exist outside of COVID-19. And perhaps we can gather together as a community of people in a very small world where we're connected. Maybe we could do better with some of the existing challenges that we have and not just keep ignoring them.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Or have a worldwide approach to them, which is exactly what's kind of happened in this space, isn't it?
Yeah, like my problem is that the Army has had an incredible impact upon me because it's let me see and appreciate people's in very different circumstances than the ones that I'm accustomed to. And that has changed how I engage with world issues and hunger and poverty and lack of clean water, or some of the social justice issues that we're facing of trafficking and so on. You can't meet these people in their circumstances and come away and forget what you've seen. So it lets us, I hope it lets the world just press the pause button. We're doing really well with how much we're polluting the world. The skies are bluer. There are no planes up there, etc., etc. Maybe we can press a pause button as well and say we have a greater capacity to care for each other.
Yeah.
Maybe.
That's good. That's good. All right. I don't have any more questions for you. Is there any, other than to say, is there any last things that, or anything that you wanna leave with us as we finish off our time? Any challenge or anything that you wanna say?
I will always be able to answer that question. Last week I used the WhatsApp on my phone to write a note to all of the leaders around the Salvation Army world. That's 58 of them. And said, I hope you're well. I'm praying for you. I'm doing our best at IHQ to support, etc., etc. They all wrote back, of course. And what I heard was, things are difficult, but God is good, God is faithful. Thank you for the support. That's helping us immensely, and so on. But what I took away from that exchange was the fact that it is not easy everywhere. People say COVID-19 is no respecter of person. And I understand that. But let me say to all of the listeners, when you get COVID-18 or 19 in Brisbane, it's going to be very different than if you contract COVID-19 in a rural part of many of the communities where the Salvation Army lives and works. And I would say to the Army world, to Australians, to people at your core, you need to just take a minute each day and look beyond your own circumstances, because in some respects, and forgive me, they may be frivolous compared to, and I know you can't go, but I know you can sometimes give, you can sometimes pray, and you can sometimes be very much more aware. And I would ask the Army to do the social media thing. I've worshipped on almost every continent of the world because I can. It's a good thing to do. It's about salvationists who are maybe not be as finely tuned as what's coming out of Carindale, but gosh, if you're sitting at home and this is what you have and this is how you connect, I'd challenge the Salvation Army to embrace the International Army during this time. We have generosity abounding around the world. More than, well, there are millions of dollars that are supporting schools and hospitals, some of our shelterings for children in our homes around the world. All of that's continuing. And I think I would say to the Salvation Army, to our soldiers and officers, just keep in mind the International Salvation Army is still serving. And if you're not sure how that's working out, go on my Facebook. I'll tell you there exactly what we're doing. And I think that will encourage Salvationists to know that we're all in this together.
Yeah, that phrase is so good, that we're all in this together, and that's one that we've been using, that we've seen many other people using. Even, you know, the non-Christian spaces are using that phrase. We're all in this together. Yeah. And that's brilliant, because there's lots that we can learn from that. I think too, and Tim and I have been saying this, that some of the stuff that we deal with is first world problems, right?
Yeah.
Like 100% first world problems, and we need to open up that gauge and recognize that we've got so much more that we can give if our perspective shifts and changes. So thank you for sharing that, because we get the privilege of hearing that when we're chatting back and forth and working through things together just personally. But it's so good to be able to share that with a larger group of people, with a larger audience that, you know, needs that check-in, and that worldview that we just don't have. Yeah. Thank you. We're gonna finish off because you've got breakfast to eat.
You don't have any more questions? I'm surprised.
Are you disappointed? Oh! I behaved myself very well.
Yes, it's harder doing a family FaceTime with you than it is formal conversation on the couch.
Well, look, we made sure that Tim took the children and the dog out so there wouldn't be any distractions today.
Yeah, you're referring to my grandchildren, are you?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
Very good. Well, thank you, Australia, for hosting my family. Take care of them, Brisbane and Carindale.
You're funny. We love you. Thank you.
Love you too. You take care.
All right.
All right.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.